And now, Chrystia, the floor is yours.
That was a great speech, Heiko. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for your warm welcome here in Berlin. And I have to say, it is such a pleasure for me and my team to be here in your amazing capital city. Berlin itself is an embodiment of the power of the human spirit and of the human ability to rebuild and quite literally to reunify. So it is great to be here. I also note that beside the Canadian and German flag, and it's great to see them together, there is the EU flag. And before beginning, at the very start, I would like to say how much Canada appreciates and values our partnership with the European Union. It is an essential, exactly as you said, Heiko, pillar of the rules-based international order. And speaking as one of your transatlantic friends, let me say how deeply we value and support the EU. We truly need a strong Europe today in the world, now more than ever. Merci à mon ami, le ministre Mas, de m'avoir invité à cette réunion annuelle des chefs de mission allemands et monsieur accrédité à l'Allemagne. Hier soir, Heiko et moi avons assisté à une dîner, un travail informel, au cours duquel nous avons discuté de nombreuses questions d'intérêt commun au Canada et à l'Allemagne. J'ai hâte de poursuivre cette conversation avec vous tous aujourd'hui. Canada and Germany have a long history of working together in multilateral institutions. For example, helping together to create the International Criminal Court, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. We're allies in the fight against climate change and in our support for the Paris Accords, a fight lent fresh urgency by the fires this summer in Potsdam, here in Germany, and in British Columbia, in my own country, where in fact I was there last week and they were so extreme that it was difficult for children to breathe and the air was visibly cloudy. One of the things Heiko and I discussed over supper last night was how we could work together to defend liberal democracy and to reform and renew the post-war multilateral order. I'd like to continue that discussion with you all today. I'd like to start on a personal note. In the late 1980s and 1990s, I studied and worked as a reporter in what was first the USSR, and while I was living there, became independent Ukraine. My experience of watching from the inside as this vast authoritarian regime crumbled profoundly shared my thinking. For you, Germans, part of whose country was a member of the Warsaw Pact, I'm sure that transformation was even more consequential. Indeed, I was living as a foreign student in what was still the Soviet Union when the Berlin Wall came down. That was a euphoric time, and it was one when it was tempting to imagine that liberal democracy was both inevitable and invulnerable. As Francis Fukuyama put it, we seem to have reached the end of history. Fukuyama wasn't, of course, arguing that history had literally ground to a halt. But he was saying that the half-century-long competition between liberalism and authoritarianism had been settled, and that liberal democracy had won. What a seductive argument. There was then a broad consensus that the Atlantic economies plus Japan led an international system of rules and institutions, the UN, the WTO, the IMF, and their brethren, that had allowed our people to thrive and would continue to do so. Critically, this was built as a system that other nations, emerging powers, could join. And join they have. Countries in the global South and Asia joined these institutions and accepted their rules. And that shift and that acceptance delivered ever higher living standards to their people. Here in Europe, Eastern and Southern friends have been welcomed into the European Union, one of the world's closest, strongest, and most essential multilateral institutions, and prospered as a result. But there was one assumption about this post-war shift that turned out to be wrong. That was the idea that as authoritarian countries joined the global economy and grew rich, they would inevitably adopt Western political freedoms too. That hasn't always happened. Indeed, in recent years, it's been alarming to watch as some democracies have slid into authoritarianism, notably and sadly in my own hemisphere, Venezuela. And it has been worrying to see countries that had embarked on the difficult journey from communism to democratic capitalism move backwards. The saddest personal example for me is Russia. While it may seem outlandish to suggest that democracy could falter or be overturned in places it had previously flourished, we must remember that other great civilizations have risen and fallen. It would be hubris to suggest that we will inevitably be different. Liberal democracy is also under assault from abroad. Authoritarian regimes are actively seeking to undermine us with sophisticated, well-financed propaganda and espionage operations. They seek to suborn smaller countries, those wavering between democracy and authoritarianism. And within our own club of wealthy Western democracies, we face threats from within. From homegrown anti-democratic movements, including neo-Nazis, white supremacists, incels, nativists, or radical anti-globalists. That brings me to what continues to be one of the biggest challenges we face, the hollowing out of the middle class. When people feel their future is in jeopardy, when they believe their children have fewer opportunities than they had in their youth, that's when they are vulnerable to the strongman or the demagogue, who scapegoats the outsider, the other, whether it's an immigrant at home or a trading partner. And the fact is, middle-class families aren't wrong to feel left behind. Median wages have been stagnating, jobs are becoming more precarious, pensions uncertain, housing, childcare, and education harder to afford. These are the wrenching human consequences, the growing pains, if you will, of the great transformative forces of the past 40 years. The technology revolution and globalization. Of the two, technology is having the greatest impact. But even free traders like me need to recognize that globalization has contributed as well. So, what's the answer? I think we are all agreed that it is not, as the Luddites unsuccessfully proposed at the start of the Industrial Revolution to stop the march of technology. We all love our smartphones too much. In my case, since I'm Canadian, I still have a BlackBerry. When it comes to trade, we need to introduce labor standards with real teeth, as Canada and the EU have done with the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA. And I do really want to thank everyone here, very much Germany, for the strong role you played in those crucial days when we were fighting to have CETA approved. Very, very important, and I think with hindsight, that fight turned out to be even more consequential than we had understood it to be at the time. So, thank you very much. With strong provisions in areas such as labor and environmental protection, CETA will deliver fair economic opportunities for people on both sides of the Atlantic. And for Germany, ratifying CETA here in your country is an opportunity to show a clear commitment to and leadership on open and progressive trade and the rules-based international order, especially at a time when transatlantic relations can be challenging. As former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt once said, markets, as well as parachutes, work only if they are open. We also know it is long past time to bring the WTO up to date within the realities of 2018 and beyond, and to seriously address non-tariff barriers to trade and forced technology transfers. Canada has convened a small group of WTO members, including the EU, to develop and advance realistic and pragmatic proposals to strengthen and support the WTO. These are positive developments, but the chief answer to the legitimate grievances of the middle class must lie in domestic policy. The middle class and the people working hard to join it need the security that comes from education in your youth, health care for your family, good jobs for your children, and dignity in your retirement. We need to think about what the jobs of the future for our citizens will be and ensure that those jobs will pay a living wage and that our people have the skills to do them. Perhaps most importantly, and this is work that would benefit from international cooperation and bilateral work between our countries, we need to ensure that in a 21st century in which capital is global, but social welfare is national, each of our countries has the durable tax base necessary to support the 99%. But setting our own house in order is just one part of the struggle. The truth is that authoritarianism is on the march, and it is time for liberal democracy to fight back. To do that, we need to raise our game. One device strongmen use to justify their rule is the Soviet trick of whataboutism, the strategy of false equivalency that holds that because democracies are inevitably imperfect, we lack the moral authority to criticize authoritarian regimes. We must be smart enough to see through this species of cynical rhetoric. It's possible, indeed necessary, for liberal Democrats to acknowledge that our democracies aren't perfect. The record of my own country's relationship with Indigenous peoples, for example, is one of tragic failure. But admitting our mistakes doesn't discredit us. On the contrary, it is one of the things that make us who we are. Germany's own post-war experience is an example. You are a strong and admired ally when Heike visited Auschwitz last week. We have much to learn from you. Sobered by our own imperfections, but not cowed by them, we all need to summon Yeats's oft-cited passionate intensity in the fight for liberal democracy and the international rules-based order that supports it. Assuming a UN Security Council seat in 2019-2020 will give Germany a unique opportunity to do just that, both speaking up for liberal democratic values and defending the UN and the multilateral system it underpins. Canada congratulates Germany on obtaining that seat, although I must say, Heike, that you guys have caused some problems for me. I am told that the sauna in your ambassador's residence was an important part of the campaign, and Canadian diplomats feel that they may need similar assistance. Because we too are campaigning for a seat on the UN Security Council. And I do want to assure you all that should we succeed in 2021, Germany will have no more effective or like-minded country to succeed you on the UN Security Council than my own. Second World War, we've worked together in an effort to build a system that promoted prosperity and prevented smaller and regional conflicts from turning into total wars. We've worked to build a system that championed freedom and democracy over authoritarianism and repression. One of the hard-won lessons of the bloody 20th century was the recognition that protection of human rights is a prerequisite for peace. That dearly earned realization led to the creation of one of the documents that underpins the rules-based international order, a document which this year celebrates its 70th anniversary, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose first article states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That is why Canada will always stand up for human rights around the world, very much including women's rights. Even when we are told to mind our own business, or that matters such as these should only be discussed in private, between leaders, behind closed doors, and even when speaking up brings consequences. We count on and hope for Germany's support. Russian human rights activist Andrei Sakharov argued 50 years ago, quote, "Those of us lucky enough to live in open societies should fight for the freedom of those born into closed ones." He was absolutely right. I believe that is a strong moral obligation.